Ladies and gentlemen, respect is often seen as something we expect from others, but it begins with how we treat ourselves. The way we value our worth and uphold our boundaries sets the tone for how others interact with us. When we don't believe in our own value, we unintentionally signal to others that it's acceptable to disregard us. Respect, therefore, is an inside job, and it starts with knowing your worth. Knowing your worth isn't about arrogance or inflating your ego. It's about acknowledging that you are inherently valuable. It's about understanding that your worth isn't tied to external achievements, the opinions of others, or any societal measures of success. Your worth is rooted in your existence, your humanity, and the unique qualities you bring to the world. This sense of self-worth is the foundation for all healthy relationships, as it empowers you to demand the respect you deserve. When we don't recognize our own worth, it becomes easy to accept disrespectful behavior from others. We might rationalize their actions, telling ourselves that it's not a big deal or that we somehow deserve it. Over time, this erodes our confidence and reinforces the belief that we're not worthy of better treatment. This cycle can be broken only when we decide to honor ourselves by setting boundaries. And boundaries are an essential part of self-respect. They're not about keeping people out or building walls. They're about defining what is and isn't acceptable in your life. A boundary says, this is where I end and you begin. I value myself enough to protect my well-being. Boundaries are not a sign of weakness. They are an act of courage and self-care. Setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're used to prioritizing others' needs over your own. You might worry about being seen as rude, selfish, or difficult. But the truth is, boundaries are a way of fostering healthy relationships. They create clarity, ensuring that both parties understand each other's expectations. A relationship without boundaries often leads to resentment and confusion, while a relationship with boundaries is built on mutual respect and trust. To set boundaries, you must first identify what matters to you. What are your values? What are your non-negotiables? Understanding these allows you to communicate your limits clearly and confidently. For example, if you value honesty, you might establish a boundary that dishonesty in a relationship is unacceptable. If you value your time, you might set a boundary around how much of it you're willing to give to people who don't appreciate it. Communicating boundaries can be challenging, but it's a skill that improves with practice. It requires assertiveness, not aggression. Assertiveness is the ability to express your needs and limits clearly, without minimizing them or attacking the other person. For instance, instead of saying, you never respect my time, you might say, I need us to respect each other's time by being punctual for meetings. This approach focuses on your feelings and needs rather than assigning blame, making it easier for others to understand and respect your boundaries. It's also important to remember that setting a boundary doesn't guarantee that others will respect it. Some people may push back or even test your limits. In these moments, it's crucial to remain firm. Enforcing your boundaries is as important as setting them. If someone consistently disregards your limits, it's a sign that they don't respect you or your well-being, and you may need to reevaluate their place in your life. Holding boundaries can feel isolating at first, but over time, it attracts the right people into your life, those who value and respect you. It also teaches others how to treat you. By modeling self-respect, you encourage others to do the same, creating a ripple effect of mutual respect and understanding. Lastly, respecting yourself and holding boundaries requires compassion, especially toward yourself. There will be times when you falter, when you allow someone to cross a line, or when you doubt your worth. In those moments, it's essential to remind yourself that imperfection is part of the human experience. You don't have to get it right every time to be deserving of respect. What matters is your commitment to valuing yourself and striving to uphold your boundaries consistently. When you respect yourself, you send a powerful message to the world about how you expect to be treated. It's not always easy, and it requires inner work and practice, but it's one of the most rewarding steps you can take toward a life filled with healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Silence can be a powerful force. It communicates in ways words cannot, often carrying emotions like hurt, fear, or contemplation. Silence allows for reflection, for listening, and sometimes even for survival in situations where speaking out feels unsafe. But while silence has its place, courage has a louder, more transformative voice. It is through courage that change happens, relationships are healed, and self-respect is reclaimed. Silence often feels like the safer option. In moments of disrespect, injustice, or vulnerability, staying quiet can seem like a way to avoid conflict or protect ourselves. We might remain silent because we fear judgment or retaliation, or because we doubt whether our words will even make a difference. Sometimes silence is the result of not knowing what to say or how to say it. And while silence can provide temporary relief, it rarely resolves the underlying issue. The problem with silence is that it allows problems to persist. It leaves misunderstandings unclarified, disrespect unaddressed, and opportunities for connection unrealized. Silence can inadvertently send a message of acceptance, signaling that we are okay with the status quo, even when we are not. Over time, this unspoken tolerance can erode our sense of self-worth and deepen the very pain we were trying to avoid. Courage, on the other hand, is the willingness to step into discomfort and uncertainty in the pursuit of something greater. It's about speaking up when silence no longer serves you or those around you. Courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, it means acting despite it. It's the voice that says, "This matters too much for me to stay silent." Courage can take many forms. Sometimes it's as bold as calling out an injustice or confronting someone who has hurt you. Other times it's as subtle as expressing your feelings, sharing your truth, or asking for help. What makes these acts courageous is not their scale, but the vulnerability they require. Speaking up always carries a risk, whether it's the risk of rejection, criticism, or simply being misunderstood. But without risk, there is no growth, no change, and no progress. For example, think about a time when someone crossed a boundary with you and you chose to stay silent. Perhaps you hoped they would realize their mistake on their own, or maybe you convinced yourself it wasn't worth addressing. Now imagine how different that situation could have been if you'd chosen to speak up not with anger or blame, but with clarity and self-respect. A courageous conversation might not have guaranteed the outcome you wanted, but it would have asserted your value and created an opportunity for understanding. Courage doesn't just benefit you, it benefits those around you. When you speak up, you set an example for others to do the same. You show that it's possible to address difficult topics with honesty and integrity. Your courage can inspire others to find their own voice, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond the initial conversation. It's important to remember that courage is not about being loud or confrontational. It's about being authentic and intentional. Speaking louder doesn't always mean shouting, it means speaking from a place of conviction and truth. Sometimes courage is simply saying, "This is how I feel," or "I need something different." These small acts of bravery can have a profound impact on your relationships and your sense of self. Choosing courage over silence doesn't mean rushing into every conflict or speaking out in every situation. It means discerning when your voice is needed and when silence might be more constructive. For instance, there are times when silence can be an act of strength, when it's used to de-escalate a heated argument or to listen deeply to someone else's perspective. But when silence becomes a way to avoid discomfort or suppress your truth, that's when courage needs to take its place. Building courage takes practice. It starts with small steps, like voicing your opinion in a meeting or sharing a vulnerable thought with a trusted friend. Each act of bravery reinforces your ability to speak up the next time. Over time, courage becomes less about overcoming fear and more about living in alignment with your values. Courage is not a guarantee of success, but it is a guarantee of authenticity. When you choose to speak rather than stay silent, you choose to honor yourself and your principles. You may not always get the response you hope for, but the act of speaking up is powerful in itself. It affirms that your voice matters, that your feelings and experiences are valid, and that you are willing to stand up for what you believe in. Ultimately, while silence may hold space for reflection or protection, it is courage that drives action and transformation. It's the bridge between where you are and where you want to be, between what is and what could be. Courage isn't just about speaking louder, it's about speaking with purpose, truth, and heart. One of the hardest truths we must confront in life is that we cannot control other people. We cannot dictate how they behave, how they think, or how they treat us. It's a reality that many of us struggle with, especially when we feel wronged or misunderstood. When someone disrespects us, ignores our boundaries, or behaves in ways that hurt us, it's easy to fall into the trap of trying to control their actions or responses. But in truth, the only thing we have direct control over is how we choose to respond. Learning to accept this distinction is one of the most powerful steps toward emotional freedom. It's liberating to understand that while we can't control others' actions, we can always choose how we react. Our reactions are a reflection of our values, our emotional resilience, and our personal boundaries. How we respond determines whether we let a situation define us or whether we rise above it. When someone behaves in a way that challenges us, whether it's an argument with a loved one, criticism from a colleague, or mistreatment by a stranger, our immediate instinct might be to try to change the other person's behavior. We may want to argue our point, prove ourselves right, or demand an apology. But this often leads to more conflict and frustration. Why? Because we're trying to exert control over something that's outside of our influence. Instead of trying to control the other person, we must ask ourselves, how do I want to respond in this moment? The power of choice lies in how we react, not in how we try to manipulate the other person's actions. When we make the conscious decision to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, we reclaim our power. One of the first steps in taking control of our response is recognizing the importance of emotional awareness. We must be mindful of our emotions and how they are guiding us in a situation. If we're angry, hurt, or frustrated, these emotions are valid. However, they shouldn't dictate our actions in the heat of the moment. By practicing emotional awareness, we give ourselves space to pause before we react. In that pause, we can choose a response that aligns with our values and dignity, rather than one driven by immediate emotion. For instance, in a situation where we're being criticized, we might initially feel defensive. Our first impulse may be to argue or justify our actions, but instead of reacting out of defensiveness, we can choose a different approach. We might take a deep breath and respond with curiosity or openness. We might say, I hear your feedback, let me reflect on it and get back to you. This response not only diffuses potential conflict, but it also shows that we're not letting the other person's behavior dictate our emotions. Boundaries also play a critical role in how we respond to others. When we clearly define and communicate our boundaries, we are asserting our needs and demonstrating self-respect. However, others may not always honor those boundaries. In these cases, we can't control their disregard, but we can control how we enforce those boundaries. If someone crosses a boundary, we can calmly but firmly state, that's not acceptable to me. If the behavior continues, we may need to decide how much space to give that person in our lives. While we can't force others to respect our boundaries, we can decide the consequences of their actions on our emotional well-being. Our response also shapes our relationships. We can choose to respond with empathy, compassion, and understanding even when others aren't treating us the way we'd like to be treated. This doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or excusing harmful behavior. It means choosing a response that reflects our own values, such as showing kindness even in the face of disagreement. Responding with empathy can sometimes lead to a productive conversation that clears the air and opens the door to greater understanding. However, there will be times when it's more appropriate to disengage or step away from a situation. Walking away doesn't mean we've lost control, it means we've taken control of our emotional state. Sometimes removing ourselves from a tense or toxic situation is the healthiest response. In these moments, we exercise self-care by preserving our peace and setting the necessary boundaries to protect ourselves. Ultimately, the only true control we have is over ourselves. We cannot force others to behave in ways that align with our desires or expectations. But we can choose how we navigate each situation, how we preserve our integrity, and how we respond in ways that reflect our values. By letting go of the need to control others and focusing on controlling our response, we empower ourselves to maintain our emotional health and create the kind of life we want to live. It's not always easy, but it is always possible. In our fast-paced, often turbulent world, we encounter all sorts of individuals, some who treat us with kindness and respect, and others who act in ways that challenge our patience, understanding, and sense of justice. In moments where we are faced with bad behavior, it is easy to react with anger, frustration, or resentment. We may feel justified in wanting to retaliate or call out the wrongdoer. But while we may not be able to control others' actions, we do have the power to choose how we respond. Compassion is not about excusing bad behavior, but about allowing us to rise above it with grace, clarity, and emotional resilience. Compassion is often misunderstood. Some people believe that showing compassion means tolerating bad behavior or letting others off the hook for their actions. This misunderstanding can prevent us from embracing compassion when it's needed most. Compassion is not about condoning or accepting harm. It's about recognizing the shared humanity in everyone, even those who act out of fear, insecurity, or pain. Compassion helps us see the bigger picture, giving us the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. When someone treats us poorly, it's natural to feel hurt or upset. But if we react solely from a place of hurt, we risk perpetuating the cycle of negativity and conflict. When we allow ourselves to be consumed by anger or resentment, we give the other person power over our emotional state. We allow their actions to dictate our feelings, which in turn can impact our behavior and relationships. Instead, compassion offers a different path, a way of acknowledging our pain while choosing to respond in a way that reflects our values and personal growth. Compassion starts with empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. When someone behaves badly, whether through aggression, criticism, or negligence, their behavior often stems from their own struggles. This doesn't make their actions acceptable, but it can help us view their behavior through a lens of understanding. Perhaps they're acting out of fear, insecurity, or unresolved emotional pain. While we are not responsible for their feelings or actions, recognizing that everyone is fighting their own battles can help us approach the situation with greater emotional maturity and perspective. Empathy doesn't mean we must tolerate mistreatment, nor does it mean we should ignore boundaries. In fact, compassion often leads us to set healthier boundaries because we recognize the importance of protecting ourselves emotionally. If someone is disrespecting us, we can still respond with compassion, but we also have the responsibility to assert our limits. Compassion allows us to approach the person with kindness, while firmly communicating what is unacceptable. By acting from a place of empathy, we avoid escalating the situation or retaliating with more negative energy. Instead, we create an opportunity for more constructive dialogue. Moreover, compassion enables us to detach from the negative emotions that can cloud our judgment. When we react from anger or frustration, our responses are often driven by our ego and a desire to be right or prove a point. Compassion helps us transcend the immediate need for validation, allowing us to maintain our inner peace. It's about acknowledging that while we can't control the other person's actions, we can control how we show up in the situation. Choosing compassion allows us to take the high road, responding with integrity, calmness, and emotional intelligence. However, it's important to recognize that compassion does not mean we should allow bad behavior to continue unchecked. Rising above negative actions doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Compassion can coexist with boundaries and self-respect. We can approach difficult people or situations with empathy while also making it clear that harmful behavior will not be tolerated. Setting boundaries is an act of self-compassion because it honors our worth and ensures that we are not subjected to unnecessary harm. Choosing compassion also means accepting that we may never receive an apology or acknowledgement from the person who wronged us. Sometimes people don't even realize the impact of their actions, or they are too prideful to admit fault. In these cases, compassion helps us release the need for validation from others. It allows us to let go of resentment, which only harms us in the long run, and instead focus on our own healing and growth. Compassion is a gift we give to ourselves, not just to others. It's also important to note that compassion is a practice. It's easy to feel compassionate in the abstract, but when faced with real-life situations that trigger our emotions, it can be challenging to act from a place of kindness. The more we practice compassion in everyday interactions, whether with loved ones, strangers, or even those who hurt us, the more natural it becomes. It's a muscle that strengthens over time. By choosing compassion, we give ourselves the emotional freedom to rise above the negativity that others may bring into our lives. Compassion is a way of freeing ourselves from the grip of anger, resentment, and frustration. It's about reclaiming our inner peace and choosing not to let the behavior of others dictate our emotional state. Compassion doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it helps us rise above it, not by ignoring it or tolerating it, but by responding to it with grace, clarity, and strength. In conclusion, the essence of living a fulfilling and meaningful life lies not in controlling the behavior of others, but in mastering how we respond to them. The way we handle difficult situations, whether through setting healthy boundaries, embracing vulnerability, or choosing compassion, defines our emotional resilience and our ability to foster deeper connections. By recognizing our own worth, we create the foundation for respect, while courage allows us to rise above conflict, standing firm in our values. Compassion, when practiced, helps us transcend negativity, allowing us to protect our peace and engage with others from a place of understanding, not judgment. Ultimately, life's challenges are inevitable, but how we respond to them shapes the quality of our relationships, our sense of self, and the impact we have on the world around us. Choosing to lead with self-respect, empathy, and courage doesn't mean we will never face hardship or conflict. It means that we approach them with the strength to rise above, to learn, and to grow. Through these choices, we empower ourselves to live authentically, build meaningful connections, and create lives rooted in purpose, integrity, and resilience. Thank you.